Should say a little bit about ourselves. So I'm Amie Albrecht. I trained as a mathematician. I spent 20 years working as an academic in that field, and I moved to Education Futures at the University of South Australia last year. But I've been working with Lisa O'Keefe for quite a while. Now, Lisa and I tend to just interrupt each other during presentations. So I might let Lisa introduce herself now, and then she can interrupt whenever she likes as we go through.
I don't know how well interrupting is going to work when we're in two different continents, but so we apologize in advance. So I'm joining you from Adelaide today, and I was originally a teacher of mathematics, so secondary mathematics. I'm currently a senior lecturer in Maths Ed here at UniSA in Adelaide. But my interest around the complexities of out of field probably stem from a position I held back in 2012 at the University of Limerick. So I was the founding academic coordinator for the Irish Professional Diploma in Mathematics for Teaching, which some of you may be familiar with, because I know some of the group used to present in this conference for quite a while. In that role, I was basically responsible for putting in place the process for their out-of-field response. Thankfully, at the time, I was still working with the team who actually designed the process, because it was a massive undertaking. But I left that role after about 12 months to take a teaching position overseas. And since then, I've been really interested in how different approaches to out of field is actually impacting on the everyday practice. So since Amie came across to join our team last year, we've just been working on this, thinking about it in a bit more detail with our local Department of Education.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. Lisa and I did some work toward the end of last year to better understand the diversity of those year 7 to 10 mathematics in South Australia in government schools. So we were working with the Department for Education. So I don't need to tell this group about the scale of out-of-field teaching around the world. I've put some statistics up here for Australia, and we saw some of these in Cassie's presentation yesterday. So we have some statistical data based on surveys, and we also have some modelling that has been done by the Australian Mathematical Sciences Institute. And these statistics are really reported in the media to highlight the scale of the issue of out-of-field teaching in Australia, and often it takes a deficit view of that. In South Australia, we don't know how many out-of-field teachers there are in mathematics, and due to the way that teachers are registered in South Australia, we don't even know how many qualified teachers there are in mathematics. So as Lisa said, our aims in partnership with the Department for Education was to better understand the diversity of those teaching year 7 to 10 mathematics. And I should say this is in secondary school in South Australia, but year 7 has only just moved from the primary school setting to the secondary school setting. And so you will find some differences in the data later that is explained by that. So we had 5 research questions guiding our study. We wanted to understand the diversity of teaching and to better inform any potential upskilling we might offer for these teachers. And so it really motivated questions 1, 4, and 5 around workforce demographics, challenges faced by teachers of mathematics, and supports that would be of most value. But as we've alluded to, we're very interested in this deficit view that is being put forward in the media in Australia, because there's an assumption that competent or qualified means competent and unqualified means incompetent or ineffective. And I know I'm coming off the back of what Jim's just talked about. But I don't think that narrative necessarily accounts for the evolving nature of knowledge and experience that teachers have. So we also wanted to understand teachers' beliefs around what counts as out-of-field teaching of mathematics and their interest and enjoyment levels. And these are the things that I'll really focus on today. Okay, so what did we do? We used a survey research design method. The survey itself heavily informed and aligned to previous surveys that have been conducted and teacher workforce data that have been collected in Australia, and also Linda's multifaceted definition of out-of-field teaching, which I'll come to. The survey remained open for about a month toward the end of the school year in South Australia. So we were very surprised by the number of responses we had, and the department distributed it for us. There were 274 responses to the survey. After data cleaning, there were 232 responses included. And what you'll see in that fourth dot point, that was open to all middle school teachers, including those who have never taught mathematics before, and even those who never plan on teaching it. Because for the purpose of the whole survey, we want to gain a bunch of views from everyone. But what I'm going to talk about today are only two cohorts. One cohort with 196 respondents who are currently teaching or have previously taught year 7 to 10 mathematics, and then 133 who are currently teaching secondary mathematics. So we're not talking about those teachers who have never taught mathematics before. Their views were useful for other parts of the survey. Just to look at demographics, one slide on this, by the traditional definition of out of field by qualification, you can see that of our respondents, 60% were out of field. So there is a question there. This is not representative sample. People have elected to do the survey, so they might be more inclined to fill it out if they're out of field. And most of them were technically misaligned, which means that they weren't trained in mathematics. Some of them are phase misaligned, about 20%, and that I suspect is that shift of year 7 from primary and a primary qualification to a secondary setting, and teachers that have moved or not. Relatively little difference by gender, by employment status, but also, and this one surprised me at least, by school educational disadvantage. So we had thought that there would be more out-of-field teaching in more disadvantaged schools and less out-of-field teaching in less disadvantaged schools, and that didn't play out in the responses that we received. Some difference by school location, but that's just to say that our respondents came from all over the place and they were predominantly all out-of-field anyway, and some difference by years in the profession. Okay, so we wanted to take a broader view of out-of-field teaching, so we used Linda's multifaceted definition, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But I'll talk through how we adapted these definitions to be compatible with a survey that needed to be short, it needed to be anonymous, and we couldn't follow up with participants. So to start with out of field by qualification, we asked a number of detailed questions about qualification to try to pin down some of the more nuanced definitions that exist out there. And in the end, it was too hard. So we used, because it was inconsistent what people told us, we used self-reported information about whether or not respondents' teaching qualification included a focus on mathematics, and then we didn't go on and classify or verify that data. We just took it at face value. So moving around this picture, out of field by workload, this describes the proportion of load that is out of field at any one time or across a period of time. That's the way that Linda has framed it. We asked respondents for a snapshot of their current teaching at the time that they did the survey. And so we used an adapted definition, which was proportion of current teaching in mathematics relative to total teaching. Out of field by specialisation is that idea of near and far alignment. It makes probably more sense in a composite subject like science or arts or HASS, but not in mathematics. So we didn't use that definition. And the final one, out of field by capability, is that recognition that teachers develop experience and confidence. It also includes identity factors, such as their sense of self in relation to the subject and their commitment to teach. And this idea that teachers may feel in field or out of field depending on their perceived or actual capability, that is their identity. And so that's what we really wanted to go after. Okay, so on that, we asked all respondents 2 questions about identity. And we had 165 people who are currently or who have taught year 7 to 10 mathematics who answered these 2 questions. So the first question, do you consider yourself a mathematics teacher? We spent a lot of time debating whether we say mathematics teacher or teacher of mathematics. I think there's a nuance there that's important. So we went with mathematics teacher. So the first thing you can see on this table, which I'm trying to point on the screen, it's not there. Okay, so look in the columns. In the first column, we're looking at those who are infilled by their qualification, and unsurprisingly, 59 out of 60 identify as maths teachers. It's more interesting when you look at the out of field by qualification, because 70% of those teachers identify as maths teachers. and 34% don't. So you could ask, how strongly connected is this identity just to whether or not they prefer to teach mathematics? Are they interpreting mathematics teacher as, well, I teach mathematics, so of course I'm a mathematics teacher. So we asked, what is your preferred learning area to teach? And we just counted whether or not maths was mentioned. So on the left, you can see just those who are infield by qualification. So again, 51 of these 60 participants who identified as maths teachers also mentioned preferring to teach maths. Interestingly, 8 of them didn't. So they're maths teachers, but when you ask them what they prefer to teach, they say, I prefer to teach science or IT or something else. So that in itself is interesting. If you look on the right, these are those who are out of field by qualification, the traditional definition of OOF. So the first thing to notice here is that we have 54, we have half of our participants identifying as maths teachers, and they mention that they prefer to teach maths. So if you identify as a maths teacher, you're pretty likely to mention preferring to teach mathematics. So that's the top left corner in the green. The bottom right corner in the green is where it gets really interesting, because if you don't identify as a maths teacher, you don't mention preferring to teach mathematics. So there is this strong connection between your preferred learning area to teach and whether or not you identify as a maths teacher. Makes sense, but it's nice to see it in the data. Okay, so the second question we asked is, do you consider yourself an out-of-field maths teacher? So again, if you look at those who are in-field by qualification, unsurprisingly, 59 out of the 60 identified as in-field. They are in-field and they identified as in-field. When you look at those who are out of field by qualification, it's split 50-50. So half of those teachers who were out of field by qualification actually saw themselves as in-field. So now we wondered, well, do they know what out of field teaching actually means? So I posed these like, we saw the data and then we asked the question, but actually we had all the data. And when we looked at this, we said, is there something else in the data that helps explain this, right? Rather than this kind of narrative view. How would you define an out-of-field teacher of mathematics? There's a lot on this slide. I won't spend too long on it. There's more to come. So we did a thematic analysis on their free text responses. A lot of the definitions were centered around a qualification to teach mathematics. If the respondent was in field by qualification, 85% of them gave a definition that centered around a qualification to teach mathematics. But when they were out of field by qualification, only 69% did. And they focused on, more of them focused on other factors for their definition of out of field teaching. We looked at the number of dimensions they referred to, and this actually won't make too much sense until I give you a sense of the kinds of things they said. So let me just click on. So here are the kinds of things that they talked about: a requirement to teach mathematics, a discomfort with mathematics, no consideration for experience or confidence, limited experience, new to teaching, enjoys teaching, or assigned to preferred to teach another learning area. So these are all the things that played into their own definitions of out-of-field teachers of mathematics. And really what was interesting is if they were in-field, they typically only mentioned one dimension, and it was either centered on the qualification or only picked up one of these other points. But if they were out of field by qualification, they actually gave bigger, more contextual responses that picked up more of these dimensions. And reading their definitions is fascinating, actually. You could do a whole PhD on that. Okay, so, oh, crikey, time's getting away. So you can combine the two identity questions to form this 2x2 grid. So what you're seeing here is the whole cohort. So the way to read this is that 60.6% of respondents both identify as a maths teacher and identifies in field. Again, more interesting when you break it down by the two cohorts. So in field by qualification, 96% identifies maths teachers and identifies in field. But again, it's out of field by qualification that is more interesting here. So we can see that 40% of those who are out of field by qualification both identify as maths teachers and identify as in field. So there's a question about that I'll come to about whether or not we should be considering those teachers of out of field as out of field or not. Okay, I'm going to pinch a few more minutes, but then we explored teacher identity and capability and workload. So I'll go through these relatively quickly. So the first thing we did was we asked teachers to indicate their personal interest, their enjoyment teaching mathematics, the things that you can see there on the left, and give a response on a scale of 0 to 5, with 0 being low and 5 being high. And here I'm giving the average self-reported responses of the teachers split into 4 different cohorts. So we have all teachers in the first column. We have in-field and out-of-field by qualification. We have whether or not they identify as maths teachers and whether or not they identify as in-field or out-of-field. And remember, 0 is low, high is 5, and 2.5 means you're in the middle. And it is the group that does not identify as a maths teacher that records the lowest mean response for every single question. We asked a number of different questions. The second one I'll share is we asked about their confidence in teaching the Australian curriculum mathematics. So the Australian curriculum is specified by year level. It's specified by, if you like, a content strand within the year level. We actually went down to the level of strand and year level, but here I've aggregated the responses. Again, it is the group that does not identify as maths teachers that gives the lowest confidence in all of these year levels. And in fact, we asked about each strand of the Australian curriculum by year level, all strands, every question we asked about the Australian curriculum, it was always this group that gave us the lowest confidence. I'm going to skip that one for time, but there is our year 7 versus year 8 data, and I can come back to it. So the final one I want to talk about is out of field by workload. So you'll recall that what we did was we asked people the proportion of teaching workload that is in mathematics to their overall teaching. And then if it was up to 25%, it was low, and so on. So what we have here is, and I should say that QUIN means in-field by qualification and QUIF means out-of-field by qualification. So in that group that are in-field by qualification, you can see that 83% of participants have a teaching workload in mathematics that is 50% or above. So that's great, but it means that we have got 17% that don't. So in the context of a teaching shortage of teachers of mathematics, we might explore what those teachers are doing. And actually, I think they're being pulled into other hard to staff areas like science. No, so this is teaching classes only. So we haven't taken that into it. So this is, if they're only teaching 2 lines, this is the proportion of the lines that they're teaching. Yeah. For those who are out of field by qualification, you can see that we've got a 50-50 split here. 50% are doing 50% or more of their teaching in mathematics. So the question here is, are those who are low just dipping their toe in to the water, or are they just filling in and they don't really want to teach mathematics? And those that are high, are they completely overwhelmed, or have they gained this confidence to teach in this new learning area? So I'm going to put the identity layer on this now, and this is a very complicated final slide. But what you can see down the bottom is these 2 identity questions for each of these workload bands. So if I start in the bottom left, we have 8 participants who identified as maths teachers and identified as in-field, even though they're out of field by qualification. And the 5 in brackets means they also mention maths as a preferred learning area to teach. So like I said, there is a lot here. So these people have a low proportion of maths classes in their teaching workload. And these 8 people identify as maths teachers and identify as in-field, and 5 of them actually like to teach mathematics, is how to read this. So we do have people in this low group who are probably just filling in. But what's interesting is if you go up to the high end, so what we have is, of the people at the high end, what is there? There's 23 participants in this high end who are doing almost all of their teaching in mathematics, 15 of those 22 identify as maths teachers and identify as in-field, and all of them prefer to teach mathematics. So the question I would end on is the one I posed at the beginning. Should we be calling these teachers out-of-field teachers of mathematics? So I'll go to dot point 3. We can't say anything about the interplay between identity and competence. So all I've reported here is confidence, not competence. So it could be that these teachers really enjoy teaching mathematics and have this this overconfidence, but are actually not effective teachers. But I would say that about some in-field teachers of mathematics as well, right? I think the data shows that OOF should be considered through multiple lenses, that identity as a mathematics teacher in particular is a key factor, and that going back to one of our original intentions, which was what should professional learning look like for these teachers, that you should consider that through an identity lens and target professional learning at needs of particular cohorts of teachers. So I've only presented a very small amount of what we did. These are the references relevant to the presentation. I didn't actually add that we had a conference paper in Merger recently as well, which reports some of this data and more. And we have a whole report that we've delivered to the department that I think is free to share, available to share, Lisa. So we can share that on request as well. But I've gone a bit over time, so I'll leave it there. All right, thanks.